At 17, I was kicked out with nothing but a small bag and a broken heart. Sent to a quiet village. I thought my life was over until an old man showed me that even the most forgotten land could change everything. Before we start, join our YouTube family by subscribing to the channel. Don't forget to like this video and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, let's get into the story. They kicked me out at 17 and it did not even feel dramatic. It felt simple and final. One moment I was inside the house, the next moment my bag was outside and the door was closed. No long lecture, no emotional goodbye, just a decision already made without me. I stood there staring at the door, waiting for it to open again. It did not. The street looked the same as always, but I felt different, like I did not belong anywhere anymore. Cars passed, people talked, someone laughed from a nearby balcony. Life was moving, but mine felt paused. I picked up my bag slowly. It was not heavy, but it felt like it carried every failure, every mistake, every argument. I started walking without direction. I told myself I was calm, but inside everything was shaking. At first I felt anger. Anger at my stepfather for saying I was useless. Anger at myself for not proving him wrong. Anger at the world for not caring. But anger does not feed you. Anger does not give you a place to sleep. By evening, I realized I had no plan. I called one friend. He let me stay the night. I could see the discomfort in his eyes the next morning. Not because he hated me, but because problems are heavy and no one wants extra weight. I left before he had to ask. I walked through the city for hours. The tall buildings that once made me feel excited now felt like walls closing in. I looked at people going to work, carrying backpacks, wearing clean clothes. I wondered how many of them knew what it felt like to suddenly have nothing. Hunger started to grow. I bought the cheapest food I could find and counted the remaining money. It was not much. Enough for a bus ticket, maybe. Not enough for rent, not enough for survival in the city. That was when the memory of the village returned. Soft but persistent, my mother used to talk about it when I was younger. She would describe open fields, quiet mornings, and simple people. After she passed away, the connection to that place slowly disappeared. But technically, there was still something there. An old house my grandfather had owned. I had visited it once as a child. I remembered cracked walls, a wooden door, and a dry piece of land behind it. Back then, I thought it was ugly and small. Now it sounded like shelter. The idea felt desperate but clear. If I stayed in the city, I would slowly become invisible. At least in the village, I would have a roof even if it was broken. I went to the bus station the next morning. The place was crowded, loud, chaotic. People with luggage, families with children, workers heading somewhere. Everyone had a destination. I had an escape. When I bought the ticket, my hands did not shake. It felt strange how quickly life can push you into decisions you never imagined. The bus ride felt longer than it actually was. As the vehicle moved, the city began to shrink behind me. Concrete turned into fields. Noise turned into wind. The air looked lighter. I kept my forehead against the window, watching everything change. I replayed the moment of being kicked out again and again. The sound of the door closing. The final tone in his voice. You are not my responsibility anymore. That sentence hurt more than the action. As the bus entered rural roads, the sky looked wider. Mountains appeared faint in the distance. Green and brown fields stretched endlessly. It looked peaceful, but I did not feel peaceful. I felt uncertain. When the bus finally stopped at the village entrance, I hesitated before standing. This was it. No turning back now. I stepped down onto the dusty road. The air felt different, cleaner, slower. A few men sitting near a small shop looked at me with curiosity. I probably looked out of place with my city clothes and tired expression. I adjusted my bag and began walking. My memory guided me, past the old well, left at the large tree, straight down the narrow path. The house appeared at the end of the road, smaller than I remembered, more fragile. The roof sagged slightly. The paint had almost disappeared. Cracks ran across the walls like scars. For a few seconds, I could not move. This broken structure was all I had. I walked closer and touched the wooden door. The surface felt rough under my fingers. I pushed it open and it made a long, tired sound. Inside was silence. Dust covered the floor. Spider webs filled the corners. An old bed frame leaned against the wall. A wooden chest sat near the window. Sunlight entered through a small opening, creating thin lines of light in the dusty air. I stepped inside fully and closed the door behind me. The sound echoed slightly. I placed my bag down and walked slowly from one room to another. Each step stirred dust into the air. The house smelled forgotten. I sat down against the wall and leaned my head back. For the first time since leaving the city, I allowed myself to stop moving. Fear crept in quietly. What if I cannot survive here? What if this place becomes another failure? The silence of the village was different from the silence of rejection. This silence felt open, like it was waiting. As evening approached, the sky outside turned orange. I stepped into the backyard and looked at the land behind the house. It was dry, cracked, uneven. No signs of life. Just rough soil under a wide sky. I stood there for a long time staring at it. This land looked exactly how I felt inside. Empty, exhausted, uncertain. Night came quickly. There was no electricity. Darkness filled every corner. I found an old blanket inside the wooden chest and spread it on the floor. The ground was hard, but it was still shelter. Every small sound felt louder. Wind brushing against the walls. Insects outside. Wood creaking. I stared at the ceiling, thinking about everything that had happened. 17 years old and already feeling thrown away. But as the hours passed, another thought slowly formed. No one here knows my past. No one here has decided who I am. No one here is waiting for me to fail. This house may be broken. This land may be dry, but they are not judging me. Maybe being kicked out was not only loss. Maybe it was separation from a place that never truly wanted me. I closed my eyes and made a quiet promise to myself. I will try. I do not know how. I do not know what I will build. But I will not run. The next morning, sunlight entered gently through the window. It felt warmer than I expected. I stepped outside again and looked at the backyard. In daylight, it looked less frightening. Still dry, still rough, but clearer. I bent down and touched the soil. It felt solid beneath the surface. For the first time since that door slammed behind me, I felt something small but real. Control. I could clean this house. I could repair a wall. I could try planting something. It would not be easy. It might even fail. But it would be my failure and my effort. Standing there in the quiet village air, I realized something important. Being thrown out ended one life, but it forced me into another. I was still scared, still broke, still unsure, but I was not completely empty anymore. I had a place to stand, a roof above even if cracked, land beneath my feet even if dry, and sometimes that is enough to begin. I looked at the house once more. Not as a symbol of what I lost, but as a starting point. This was not the life I planned, but it was the life in front of me, and for the first time since everything collapsed, I felt ready to face it. The morning after my first night in the old farmhouse, sunlight poured through the cracked wooden windows, painting the dusty floor in thin golden lines. I rubbed my eyes, stretched, and stepped outside. The air smelled of wet soil and pine from the small forest at the edge of the property. A cool breeze ran across the open fields behind the house, and for a moment I simply stood still, letting it wash over me. It was quiet, almost too quiet compared to the city. No honking, no shouting, no sirens, just the distant crow of a rooster and the faint rustle of leaves. I took a few steps toward the dry, cracked patch of land behind the farmhouse. It looked hopeless. Hard soil, rocks scattered across it, and the remnants of weeds struggling to survive. I knelt down and touched the dirt. It crumbled loosely in my hands. I wanted to give up already. Then I heard it, a slow creak from the old porch. I turned my head and saw him, leaning on a sturdy wooden cane, walking toward me with steady, deliberate steps. His hair was white, streaked with gray, and his clothes were simple, a faded flannel shirt tucked into worn jeans. He had the kind of presence that demanded respect without needing to say anything. "You must be Ethan," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I'm Mr. Harris, your grandfather's old friend. He talked about you when you were a kid." I nodded, unsure if I should speak first. I came here because I had nowhere else." He studied me for a long moment, his eyes scanning the bruised, tired expression on my face. "You've got spirit," he said finally. "Most kids your age would have crumbled in a city after what happened." I shrugged. "I don't feel very strong." He smiled faintly. "Strength isn't just about muscles or city smarts. It's about what you do when you feel like giving up. That's what makes people strong." I didn't respond. I wasn't used to being spoken to like this. Most people either yelled at me, ignored me, or told me I was a burden. Mr. Harris, he didn't do any of that. He simply looked at me as if I were capable of more than I believed. He walked to the backyard and gestured toward the dry, cracked soil. "This land is like life," he said. "People see cracks, rocks, weeds, and they assume it's useless. But it's not. With patience, care, and work, anything can grow." I laughed bitterly. "This dirt hasn't grown anything in years, just like me. I doubt I can make it work." "Doubt is natural," he said, crouching down and touching the soil. "But look closer, feel it. Life is sleeping under the surface, waiting for someone to give it a chance." I looked at him and saw something I hadn't expected: faith. Not blind faith, but the kind that comes from experience. He had tilled this soil before, I could tell. He had struggled, failed, and succeeded, and he knew what he was talking about. Over the next few days, Mr. Harris visited me every morning. He brought old farming tools, seeds, and a quiet determination that was almost contagious. At first, I did nothing but watch. I wasn't sure if I had the strength or patience for this kind of work, but he never pressured me. He just kept showing up, silently demonstrating that persistence mattered more than talent. One morning, he handed me a rusty hoe. "Try it," he said. "You don't have to be perfect. Just start." I hesitated. The handle felt foreign in my hands. My arms ached after just a few swings. Dirt flew into my clothes, my face, my hair. But something about the rhythm, the motion of breaking the hard earth, felt satisfying. Mr. Harris nodded as he worked beside me, never rushing, never speaking too much. Days turned into weeks. My hands became rough and calloused. My muscles ached constantly. The sun beat down mercilessly during the afternoons, and I often returned inside the house covered in sweat, dirt, and small scratches from weeds. But slowly, tiny changes appeared. A small green sprout here, a stubborn root breaking through the soil there. Each one felt like a victory, a tiny proof that I could make something grow, even when it seemed impossible. One evening, as we were collecting water from the old well, I asked Mr. Harris why he was helping me. He paused, leaning on his cane, and looked out across the fields, the sun dipping behind the distant hills. "Because someone once helped me," he said finally. "I didn't have anyone when I was your age. Just like you, I was thrown into the world with nothing. But an old man showed me that patience, work, and belief could change everything. I owe him that much, and I see the same in you." His words sank deep into me. I realized then that my anger, fear, and uncertainty weren't weaknesses. They were energy. They could be channeled into something tangible, something lasting. By the third month, the once dry backyard had transformed. Small rows of vegetables appeared, sturdy green shoots standing proudly where only cracked soil had been. I planted tomatoes, peppers, carrots, and beans, each plant a tiny testament to persistence. The house, too, saw changes. I fixed the sagging porch, patched holes in the roof, and even painted the door a bright red, giving the old structure a sense of life it hadn't had in decades. The villagers began noticing. At first, they watched quietly from the distance. Then, a few came over, asking if they could buy some of the vegetables. Small transactions at first, a few dollars here and there, but enough to make me realize that what I had built was starting to matter. I was no longer invisible. I was contributing, creating, and people saw it. One evening after a long day of digging, planting, and watering, I sat on the porch with Mr. Harris. The air smelled of fresh earth and evening grass, and the sky blazed with streaks of pink and orange. "I never thought I'd be able to do this," I admitted, my voice quiet. "I thought I'd fail again, just like in the city." He chuckled softly. "Failure is only failure if you stop. Every time you try, every time you keep going, you're learning. And what you're learning now, this is more valuable than anything the city could have taught you." I looked out across the rows of green, the small cabin, the open fields stretching to the forest. For the first time, I felt a deep sense of belonging. The city had kicked me out. But this place, this old farmhouse, this land, this was where I could grow, literally and figuratively. Months passed. Each day brought new lessons. I learned to rotate crops, to prepare soil for planting, to fix a broken fence, and even to patch the small barn that housed a few chickens. The land demanded attention, and giving it that attention taught me patience, responsibility, and pride. Mr. Harris continued to guide me, but gradually he stepped back, letting me make mistakes and discover solutions on my own. He would say, "I can't plant for you, Ethan. I can only show you how to plant. You have to do the work yourself." I understood then that his true lesson wasn't about farming, it was about life, about taking responsibility, about believing in your own ability to change circumstances, about turning nothing into something. By the end of the first year, the old farmhouse was unrecognizable. The garden thrived, the barn had been repaired, and the house was warm and lived in. I had turned a place that once seemed broken and hopeless into something alive. And through it all, Mr. Harris remained by my side, not as a boss, not as a critic, but as a mentor, someone who believed in me even when I doubted myself. For the first time since being thrown out of my old home in the city, I felt truly capable. I wasn't just surviving, I was building, creating, and growing. The boy who arrived scared, angry, and unsure had begun transforming his life. One seed, one day, one small victory at a time. And I knew deep down whatever challenges the future held, I could face them. Because I had learned the most important lesson of all. Even when life seems barren, even when the world casts you aside, persistence, care, and belief can turn nothing into everything. The next morning, sunlight stretched across the fields like gold spilling over the hills. Ethan stood at the edge of the garden, arms crossed, watching the plants sway gently in the breeze. The small farmhouse, once cracked and tired, now looked alive. Fresh paint on the door, repaired roof, and a porch sturdy enough to sit on. He took a deep breath, smelling the crisp air mixed with the aroma of the growing vegetables. It was hard to believe this had been the same broken house he had arrived at just months ago. Mr. Harris appeared from behind the barn, whistling softly. His cane tapped rhythmically against the wooden boards as he walked toward Ethan. "Morning, kid," he said, smiling. "Looks like another perfect day for work." Ethan nodded, a smile tugging at his lips. "I can't believe how much has changed. Just a few months ago, I didn't even know if I'd survive here." "Survival isn't just about keeping a roof over your head," Mr. Harris said. "It's about finding a reason to stay, to fight, to grow. And you found that reason." They began the morning by tending to the vegetable rows. Ethan carefully watered the young plants, making sure each received enough sunlight and attention. Mr. Harris worked beside him, guiding when necessary but letting Ethan take the lead. The rhythm of the work was almost meditative. The gentle swoosh of the watering can, the earthy smell of soil, the soft hum of the wind. Weeks turned into months, and the farm continued to thrive. The once barren soil now produced healthy tomatoes, peppers, carrots, and beans. Ethan had repaired the barn and set up a small chicken coop, providing eggs for the local villagers. He even fenced part of the yard to protect the crops from deer and rabbits. Each accomplishment felt like a small victory, proof that effort and patience could transform the seemingly impossible into something real and lasting. Word of Ethan's growing farm spread through the nearby town. Curious neighbors began stopping by, asking to buy vegetables or offering advice. At first, Ethan was hesitant. He wasn't used to attention or praise. But Mr. Harris encouraged him. "People will recognize what you've built. Don't be afraid to share it." Ethan slowly learned how to manage small transactions, keep track of money, and even barter for tools and seeds with other farmers. The farm was becoming not only a source of food, but also a source of independence. For the first time in his life, he felt capable of shaping his own future. One evening, after a long day of planting and repairing the fence, Ethan sat on the porch with Mr. Harris. The sun had dipped behind the hills, casting long shadows across the fields, and the air was cool and calm. "I never thought I'd be able to do this," Ethan admitted. "I thought I was too weak, too unlucky, too everything, and now it feels like I've built something that actually matters." Mr. Harris nodded. "You did build it, not me. I only showed you the way. You took the risks, put in the work, and believed when it was hard. That's what matters." Ethan thought about the life he had left behind. The city, the cramped apartment, the stepfather who had thrown him out. For months he had carried that pain with him, letting it weigh him down. Now, as he looked across the thriving fields and the repaired farmhouse, he realized that being forced out had been a strange kind of blessing. It had pushed him into a place where he could grow not just crops but himself. The following months brought new challenges. One particularly harsh week of summer brought scorching heat, and Ethan had to figure out how to keep the plants hydrated without wasting water. A sudden rainstorm knocked over part of the fence, letting a few chickens escape and forcing him to chase them down through the tall grass. There were moments of frustration, exhaustion, and doubt. But each time he remembered Mr. Harris's words. Persistence, care, and belief could turn nothing into everything. The farm continued to expand. Ethan cleared a small section of forest behind the property, planting more vegetables and even setting up a tiny orchard with apple and peach trees. He installed a small greenhouse, learning through trial and error how to maintain humidity and soil conditions for different plants. The farm had grown from a desperate refuge into a self-sustaining project, something that gave him pride, purpose, and hope. Through it all, Mr. Harris remained a steady presence. Sometimes they worked in silence, letting the rhythm of labor speak. Other times they sat on the porch in the evenings, talking about life, the town, and stories from Mr. Harris's past. Ethan learned that Mr. Harris had built a similar farm decades ago, lost it once due to bad weather, and rebuilt it from scratch. He understood resilience in a way that Ethan was only beginning to grasp. One chilly autumn morning, Ethan was checking the greenhouse when a delivery truck from the town rolled down the dirt road. The driver, a local grocer, greeted him warmly. "I hear you've got some of the best vegetables around," he said. "Mind if I take a crate or two back to the market?" Ethan hesitated, then smiled. "Of course. The more people who eat fresh produce, the better." The grocer loaded the crates, offering Ethan a small check for the vegetables. It wasn't much, but it felt like a milestone. For the first time, Ethan realized that he was not just surviving but contributing, creating value and gaining independence. By winter, the farm was prepared for the cold months. Ethan had learned to store vegetables, preserve them, and keep the greenhouse running efficiently. The farmhouse was warm, the barn stocked, and the land, though dormant under frost, was ready to spring back to life in the coming year. One evening, sitting by the fireplace, Ethan reflected on how far he had come. A year ago, he had been kicked out with nothing but a small bag and a broken heart. Now he had built a life, a home, and a purpose. He thought about the lessons he had learned: patience, resilience, care, and belief. He thought about Mr. Harris, who had guided him without ever taking control. Ethan realized that what had seemed like punishment, the city kicking him out, had been an opportunity. It had forced him to step into a life he might never have chosen willingly, one that required hard work, courage, and dedication. And through it, he had discovered that even a barren piece of land or a broken farmhouse could become a place of growth, hope, and transformation. By spring, the orchard bloomed and the greenhouse flourished. Neighbors came to visit, children ran through the fields, and Ethan felt a sense of belonging he had never known in the city. The farm had become more than survival. It was life, community, and pride. One evening, watching the sunset behind the orchard, Ethan turned to Mr. Harris. "I don't know how to thank you for all of this," he said. Mr. Harris smiled, a twinkle in his eye. "No need to thank me. You did it yourself. I only showed you the way. You had to walk it." Ethan realized that life would always throw challenges his way, but he now had the skills, the strength, and the courage to face them. The boy who had been kicked out at 17 had grown into someone who could transform barren land into life, despair into hope, and a broken house into a home. And as he watched the stars appear over the small town, the wind rustling through the trees, and the faint glow of the farmhouse lights, Ethan knew that whatever the future held, he could handle it, because he had learned the greatest lesson of all, that even when life seems empty, when the world turns its back, persistence, belief, and hard work could change everything.